rotted review of the day, and happy December 20th as we continue on with our advent calendar of Christmas horror movies leading up to the 25th. And today, I'm reviewing the 2018 movie Elves. This is a follow-up to the 2017 movie The Elf, which I reviewed last year. And boy, how do I even describe this? One of the questions I frequently get asked as a horror movie reviewer, and if you're a fan of this channel, you probably heard me reference it, is what is the worst movie you've ever seen? It's one of the most common questions I get, aside from what's your favorite horror movie. To this day, the answer to that is The Dread Ratlin. That is absolutely the worst movie I've ever seen. And I've always maintained that it's going to take a lot to get it dethroned. And what I will say about Elves is, man, it gave it a good whirl. I would say that Elves wound up in my place of second worst horror movie. Well, second worst movie I've ever seen, hands down. And it really came close to edging out The Dread Ratlin, but I don't think it quite achieved that much. If I were to try and describe what this movie was about, I just couldn't do it. One of my complaints about The Elf, I actually went back and watched my review just to kind of refresh myself, is that the circumstances behind the lore and the characters and so forth were a bit ambiguous. It didn't do a very good job of explaining itself, and the only real follow through between the two movies, the bridge between them, is it has the same writer. And boy, did he do way worse in this one. I really can't describe what this movie's about. I can't even really give it a 5-mile overview because I really just don't fucking know. It is a loose amalgam of weird shit happening that surrounds these two dolls. And to give you an example of what I'm talking about, there's one scene in particular. It takes place about, I would say at the 2/3 mark here, where two characters are trying to figure out how to break some curse that keeps seeming to change their own rules on them. That's neither here nor there, but they're trying to figure out how to break this curse regarding this elf doll. And they come across this old woman. They say she's an old woman. She looks like she's about 23. And this woman is starting to describe the lore to them as she's describing the history of the elves. And she goes into the story of Jesus' birth and how they were visited by the three kings, the three wise men and so forth, as they brought presents to Jesus Christ. And she's going on about this, and we're still trying to find the connection. But then she explains that they weren't just kings, they were magi. And the biblical references never actually say how many of the kings there were, the magi there were. They only said how many gifts they brought. So the actual number of the magi was not 3, but 7. So that is the elf situation kind of wrapped up there, as if that actually explains anything. So the girls naturally say, okay, so there are 7 of these dolls. We have to find 7 of them and capture them and so on and so forth. And she's like, no, there's only 2. The fuck? It comes right out of nowhere. And then they have the big reveal where the two girls that are asking help from this old woman, they see a class of 96 or something rather poster on the wall, and they, oh my God, she's only 20.
Slow. Holy shit. She's only 20 years old. She's 20 years old.
She only looks 20. The whole thing is absolutely terrible. We'll just hop from one foot to the other on this weird lore, from one doll to another, then having a 7-foot tall creature with a mask. It's just this, and then people are changing their faces, and it really seems random. And then so the people have to kind of do the truth or dare, where they write their worst secrets on a piece of paper, and they have to do what they're told in relation to that secret. Oh, you did a hit and run, well, you got to do another. But you did it, but that one didn't count because the doll wasn't watching. Well, what? This is the cinematic equivalent of having an absolutely plastered futures trader try to explain to an entire group of people the ending climactic scene of Trading Places. It's just a rambling mess of a journey that never goes anywhere except on a never-ending twisting path of exposition with nary a breadcrumb to be found. It's just miserable and hopeless. And as bad as the story is, the acting is even worse. From start to finish, not a single line was delivered well. Forget an individual's performance. I would say forget having a single actor deliver anything reasonably well. This is not one single piece of dialogue was delivered in any believable fashion whatsoever. When the movie first started, it started for some reason, I have no idea why, with two little boys, brothers seemingly, that are kind of interacting with one another.
It's not in here.
Of course not, because Christmas is stupid.
No, it's not.
Santa is not real.
You're lying. Yes, he is. I'm gonna tell Mom.
I felt terrible. Even, I was thinking to myself, how am I going to mention this in my review of this movie if I have to single these kids out? I mean, kids in horror movies, it can be really hit or miss. But, if that was kind of the black stain on this movie, then I would at least have to mention it. And thankfully, I don't have to single them out because everybody was this bad. However much it was, the total value of the Chipotle coupon books that these actors were compensated with, I would say with the performances that they turned in, they were overpaid. And I don't mean to sound too awful mean about it, but this was infuriatingly bad. Somebody should have stopped this. Ultimately, that's kind of the point that I want to get at, is I don't really necessarily blame the actors. I think that they were just way over their head. It was clear that this was kind of friends and family and just not really being given any sort of direction, any sort of instruction, any sort of prep time, any sort of rehearsals, any sort of tools with which they could possibly succeed. And I am not going to blame them for that. This is on the filmmakers themselves. They should have picked more professional folks, and if they couldn't have afforded them, then they should have taken folks that would have worked for free or exposure and taken them under their wing and worked with them to deliver something reasonably well done in terms of a performance on camera. And if that wasn't possible, then the movie should not have been made. I'm going to go and throw up all the scores here. As always, 4 different categories, each one worth up to 25 points for a total possible score of 100 points. Now, the plot obviously gets 0 points. This was just an absolute mess that I couldn't follow. It hopped from one foot to the other. It had no idea what it was doing, why it was doing it. And as far as the characters go, they were just the absolute most anonymous, vapid, hollow characters I've ever seen, almost ever seen put to screen. Everybody there was basically, the only reason that they existed was to deliver some awkward dialogue and then get killed. So nothing on the plot, absolutely nothing on the intent, whatever what set out to achieve, it absolutely failed 100%. Just nothing enjoyable about this, not entertaining, not scary, not enjoyable, not fun, not whimsical, not so bad it's good. It's just shitty. 0 out of 25 on that one. The acting on the Dread Ratlin, I basically gave participation points. They showed up, they delivered their lines, they went home. And I didn't feel comfortable giving 0 points for that because technically the performances were there. And on that basis, I feel comfortable giving the exact same points for that on this one. They did show up. They did deliver their lines. They did go home. What they turned in was absolutely nothing that was noteworthy in the slightest, but they did do it. And again, I really don't feel comfortable faulting the actors and giving a 0. That almost feels like a purposeful slap in the face, and I really don't feel comfortable doing that to the actors. It's not really in me. They technically did their job, and I have a feeling they did their job perfectly as directed. So I'm going to give participation points alone for that. And the technical, I also give 3 points. There was some practical effects. There was some CG. This was probably the area of the movie that was the most competent. That's not to say that it was competent, but it was there. And I guess it was done to a reasonably sufficient level to earn itself 3 points out of 25, which gives us a grand total of 6 out of 25 points, which is 3 more than the Dread Ratlin. It is still one of the worst movies I've ever seen, and on that basis, I would absolutely not recommend it, and I would recommend against it. I would advise anybody that is possibly thinking of watching 2018's Elves to reconsider. This is an 80-minute long movie, and that is 80 minutes longer than it should have been. It should just not have been released. Somebody should have read the script and said, no, we're not turning the cameras on. Somebody should have been in the editing room and working with the dailies and said, no, we're not cutting this. Somebody should have seen the final print and said, no, we're not releasing this. Somebody should have said, no, this movie cannot happen as it is. And nobody did. And on that basis, I recommend heartily against it. I will be the one to say, no, it should not be watched. So that should about do it. That is my review of 2018's Elves. I really thank you for joining me here today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe. And if you want to support me further, my Patreon and my merchandise storefront links are below. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.